So I'll hand you over to Frederick, who will be doing a slide show about his work, and we'll hold some questions at the end. So if you can just wait towards the end of the talk, we'll open up the floor for some questions. Okay, Frederick.
Thank you. Well, hello. I recognize some names and some faces in the screen presentation of who's here. First of all, I'd like to thank Jamie for inviting me to kick off with this series of presentations, and I'm now going to attempt to go straight into screen share. Okay, that looks promising. I started printmaking in 2005. Before I was a printmaker, I used to do abstract paintings. So on the screen, you should be able to see an old painting that's pre-2005. And the point of this is that the kind of where I came from, this abstract sense, it's still got structure. I think all of the time that I spent doing abstract work ingrained in me a firm sense of structure, which you still need when you're doing representational things, because a picture of a chair or a tree is not just a picture of a chair or a tree, it's also a structure as well. So I start off with some themes: body, space, light, architecture, and I'm now going to move to the first slide, and something has gone wrong because I can't move. There we go. The first slide, architecture and space. This is an engraving on copper. I don't very often do those because they're physically very demanding. This is the murder of some doctors outside a city wall. They're being beheaded. And this is this is based on a sketch I made of a painting, a little painting by Fra Angelico, which is in the Louvre. And this is it. This is space, shape, architecture, and the scope for violence. Now, here is another space. This is a parade ground before the parade begins, and it's got this kind of same ideas in it: architecture, the 4 spectators at the front, except those chairs are empty, and they remained empty through the whole ceremony. And there is the rainy light in between, waiting for events to happen. That one is a wood engraving. So I now move on to space, but this time this is space filled with activity. On the right, you can see a not brilliant picture, but a detail from Uccello's Battle by Night, which is in the Louvre. It's a huge painting. When I saw it, I was really taken by it. I attempted to make a little sketch of it, which you can see underneath the Uccello. It's very, very rough and ready, but the core elements are there: crowded people and these wooden implements, which of course are spears, pointing off in discordant directions. On the left is my wood engraving. That is people on a bus. But the poles on the bus, they to me are like the spears in Uccello. And everybody in the engraving is pointing in a different direction. The guy at front looks rather panic-stricken. The woman at the front is leaning away from some possibly catastrophe, while everything else is going on around her. Now that's an engraving that was kind of waiting to happen for a long time after I saw the Uccello and made my little drawing of the Uccello. Ideas, they lurk and they wait, and eventually sometimes they are realized. Architecture, light, space. This is a scene in London. Different shapes combined, curves, trees, and the tall building at the back with its grid of windows, which is another thing that I'm recurrently interested in. So windows. Windows, they're a grid pattern, and our lives are lived out on a background of grids and timetables, databases with Excel spreadsheets. Grids are a kind of part of the modern human experience. So I think they've always, for me, got a kind of metaphorical extension. Here the windows are in the background, and this is a mezzotint. You start from a rough plate and smooth it down and then ink it up and print it. So this is space, this is vacant space, and it's still, it's completely still. It's a matrix through which for a moment the shadowy walking figure passes. So that is space being traversed. Okay, space, another instantiation of space, the garden. I've done more than one garden print, but this is just a representation. And I've written after it Japanism. Not all gardens are Japanese, not all pictures of gardens are in the Japanese mode, but this is an engraving done from a sketch I made in 2017 of Monet's garden at Giverny. It's the bamboo section of his garden. The house attached to the garden contains Monet's extensive collection of Japanese prints. And so here everything is coming together. Japanese prints, Japanese character, and the bamboo and Monet's garden. This is space filled in a different sort of way because the trees, the bamboo plants, they recede into the distance. At the front, the leafage that has fallen down, these stalks in the very front of the foreground, they are also a sort of allusion to Japanese writing, just to make that kind of connection. Okay, so from space I move to in between space. Here we've got another mezzotint. This is metaphorical in between space. It is the space between silence and beginning a concerto. But really, what I'm interested in especially is physical in-between space, passages, corridors, staircases like this image of the Scotsman Steps in Edinburgh. And this also has got light and windows into the bargain. Here we've got a figure moving forwards, seen from behind, and for me, that always, or very often suggests the figure is moving into the future. The figure is facing the same way that you are facing as you look at the figure. And that is why the figure is metaphorically moving into the future. Here's another window and another figure looking outwards. This is the window on the left. This is the window as a kind of point of contact between inner and outer experience. So you could think of that as kind of metaphor for the world and the mind. There is something else to say about this, and that's a technical matter. I did this wood engraving on the left with a tool which was then new to me, a multi-line tool. So all the trees that you can see through the window, they're done with this tool that will carve 4 lines at the same time as each other. The shading on the legs and the shoulders is done with the same tool, and it opens up a whole new range of possibilities. Quite a lot of the time, what one's doing is finding technical challenges and using those as a kind of impetus for getting something that has got meaning beyond that. Similarly, the windows on the right, here we concentrate on the interiority of the window. We can't really see what's going on outside the window, but the challenge here was making a plate etched and aquatinted with a number of different colors on the same plate to create the atmosphere. Okay, now light in itself, that's a little image of a cubicle in the Stockholm archipelago. And here we've got light on the left in a wood engraving falling onto a table with water jugs in the cafe of the gallery at Ordrup Art Gallery in Denmark. Now, years ago, I saw for the first time, and I've seen it many times since then, Vermeer's painting of the jug lady with her jug of milk. A lot of the elements in these two images, they're the same. The one doesn't come directly out of the other, but that Vermeer image, I've seen it many times, it's lurked in my brain. And so when I saw the real life figure with the water jugs, it sort of, there was an echo that attracted me. So it became the basis of this engraving. You will, of course, notice that Vermeer's jug lady faces forward and my jug lady is facing away. This is like the question of what does it look like from the other side? When you see a painting, what does it look like from the other side? I'll say no more about that for the moment because I'm going to come back to that again in a few minutes. Okay, more space. This is negative space. This is space which has been vacated by a human being. So you can still feel, I think, the presence of the human being. In this case, the human being is me. This is the chair where I do my violin practice, and I have obviously come away because you can't see me. And the sun is streaming in through the windows. Seen from behind is something I've mentioned a few times already. That's an image from one of the paintings of Wilhelm Hammershøi, now becoming quite famous. And again, this is an artist I became aware of some 20 odd years ago. And images produced by him, they've lurked in the brain and they're kind of waiting to find echoes in the experience of real life. And there are two figures facing away from the spectator. One's walking, one's on a bicycle. One is in an urban architectural scene with arch and stone and buildings, and the other is also urban. This is a Tiergarten in Berlin. The arch has been replaced by a kind of arch of trees. So there's a different flavor, different kind of motion, different arrangement of the light. The figure in the entry to Sainte-Chapelle on the right is moving into the light from a shady arched tunnel. The figure on the left is moving from the light into the shade. They're both moving into the future. More figures facing away from the viewer. Now, there's something different to say about these two. And that is that in both of these two, I'm trying to do something that's almost contrary to the nature of wood engraving. I'm trying to produce blurry images. The one on the left is also got windows in it. That is not yet printed. That is a photograph of the block. I get a wooden block, I cover it with Indian ink, and when I cut through with my tools, the wood underneath shows up white. So you have an idea of what the final effect is going to be. The one on the right, that is that's a printed wood engraving. That's a figure in Fontainebleau in France. So that's the technical challenge, producing a blurry image with its particular kind of atmosphere. Okay, occupying visual space. Now I've got there a quotation, not necessarily accurate because I didn't check the source. Nothing in the visual field entails the existence of an observer. That's from Wittgenstein's Tractatus. And my question is, or does it? Because here we've got the visual space filled with things from the real world. And in both those instances, the close-up fills the gaze, and that implies an emotional engagement between the viewer and the subject. The emotion is built into what is seen. And so those are my kind of arguments against Wittgenstein's proposition. Here are more close-ups, this time not of body parts as such, but of the spaces left by body parts. On the left, a pair of boots, and on the right, hidden under probably some of the people that you can see, a pair of slippers and some underwear on a wooden floor. And here there's a kind of almost a joke. The wooden floor is carved into wood to make the wood engraving. On the left of the boots are a mezzotint, which is done in copper. Another close-up with, again, a kind of emotional involvement implied by the close-up. This is an etching. This is of the same water jugs that were in an earlier wood engraving. And the intense light and the dark, that's kind of characteristic of etching. Okay, some nudes, and here this is, I guess this is a subject matter in which I do particularly experiment with lines and approaches to lines, but there's also more intertextuality. Okay, this is quite complicated. The wood engraving on the left, again, is kind of element of blurriness in the design. That is made entirely of straight lines, with the exception of the sketch that you can see in the engraving. So you look at the sketch in the engraving at the foreground, it looks nothing like the model at all. And so that's kind of, for those that have read it, a reminiscence of a short story by Balzac, The Unknown Masterpiece, in which Fraunhofer paints a nude, but works at it, and in the end it looks nothing like the subject at all, and he goes mad and commits suicide. This as a kind of prescient vision of modern art. So the curved lines in the sketch are qualitatively different from everything else. Now, this, we've got the recumbent figure, and in the front we have the artist. This is another case of what would it look like from the other side. And behind the pictures of some of the people attending the show is a painting by Lotte Lasserstein, a pre-war German artist who escaped Nazi Germany just in time. It shows a recumbent model and the artist in the background. The artist would be painting from the rear, so what the artist would see would be something like what I have put into the wood engraving. So my engraving, it does allude to Lasserstein's picture, and it's got this idea of what would it look from the other side. And I was quite conscious of the connection with Lasserstein's painting when I did this. There's a bit more background because this goes back to the Renaissance issue of which is better, painting or sculpture. Sculpture because you can see it from all angles, or painting because whatever's painted, you can see the background as well. Now, halfway through the Italian gallery in the Louvre, there is a painting that's in a freestanding frame in the middle. Daniele da Volterra, Battle of David and Goliath. On one side, it depicts the same scene from the front, and on the other side from the rear. This is a Renaissance artist saying painting is better because you can see the background and you can see, if you so choose to paint it, both sides of the picture. I'm now trying to move on to the next slide. And here we go. Yes, experiment with lines. The figure in the wood engraving, the lines there, they're not all straight lines as they were in the previous slide. They're curved lines. They're like fire. They're like flames, or they're like ripples of water carved into this very dry material wood. Christopher Eckersberg, a Danish painter of the 19th century, that painting, I've known it for a long time, sort of lodged subconsciously in my brain. And again, this is kind of engraving that has waited to materialize for a long time. There's a subconscious connection between what I've done and a sort of putative original in Eckersberg's painting. heads and more echoes, some of them deliberate and some of them not deliberate. The Gerhard Richter's painting of his daughter, she's momentarily looking away, aside. That's just a fragment of time. I've known the painting for a long time, but I kind of not consciously kept it on my mind. My engraving on the left, rear of head, absolutely square, facing away from the viewer. The head that faces away from the viewer like that is almost a kind of image of the viewer. The viewer becomes the head that you can see, and we're both looking into the future. And again, this is occupying visual space. The head and hair occupy the whole of the picture plane. Okay, now here, this is rather a different level of consciousness. Behind the pictures of people attending the presentation, there is a painting, The Reader by Gerhard Richter. It's a female figure reading, and it's got a connection, obviously, with Vermeer. But what I'm interested in is the tradition of Renaissance left-facing female portraits. The Polluaiolo is just one of many examples, a particularly nice one. So I didn't have that single image in mind when I did my left-facing portrait, but I had the genre in mind. But I made it modern by the inclusion of headphones. Incidentally, the figure, that's Mrs. Jones, that's my wife. She is looking at a painting in the Gemälde Gallery in Berlin. Not as it happens, the Polluaiolo, which is also there, but at, I think, an Adam and Eve. And here you can see the approach lines very different, almost like a sort of Versalian image of muscle tissue. And the dark background may be reminiscent of paintings by Cranach, but it's got a kind of existential implication as well. Okay, now, I don't know if you can hear the beeping noise, which is me trying to move onto the next slide. Whoops, I've moved onto too far. There we go. Again, an absolutely conscious allusion. Angela Repping, member of the Society of Scottish Artists. This was a painting called 14 because the portrait is of a 14-year-old, which was shown in the Society of Scottish Artists show, I think 2, 3 or so years ago. And my wife and I were there. And the next day, it was cold, so she was wearing a woolly hat. And she said, you could do something just like that. And I thought, yeah, I could. And so took a photograph, and that is a kind of, that's a homage to Angela Repping, different gender, different age, and there you go. So I move to the next and final slide. Okay, self-portrait of the artist as a grumpy old person. I was sitting at the table, and there was a device for spraying water onto plants, and it's made of metal, so it got my reflection in it. I started drawing it, and that became the source of this wood engraving. I did have lodged in my mind somewhere a painting which I had not yet seen, but which I knew of from the American poet John Ashbery's long poem, which starts off from Parmigianino's self-portrait in a curved surface. So there's a kind of semi-conscious, semi-accidental relationship between previous art and an experience, fleeting experience, which I happen to have and put into a wood engraving in that kind of way. All of these pictures, they are, as it were, memories. And together they form a kind of kaleidoscopic, almost like a sort of novel, but not one that's in a fixed order, one that you can rearrange by having an exhibition with this or that selection. Some of you may have seen, or may be about to see, the exhibition in the Art North Project's website, the online gallery, where some of these same prints are on show, but not all of them. The compilation, the assemblage is different. Now I'm going to stop the slide sharing now, and that I think means I'm now open to questions. And I hope you heard and saw everything. There we go.
That was fascinating, Frederick. Thank you very much for that. Has anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask Frederick? You just need to unmute yourself if you're interested. Rona?
Thanks very much for that, Frederick. It was really interesting. I was just going to ask, there's obviously quite a strong kind of presence of painting in your printmaking, and I wondered if you painted as well, or what, if you could kind of tell us a bit about the relationship between those two things.
Yes, I do paint fairly occasionally and on a very small scale, like the vast majority of my total corpus of some, I don't know, 15 or 20 paintings is 3 inches by 2 inches, really little ones. And it comes in phases. Before I started printing, I did paint these abstract things like I showed in the first slide, but again, never very prolifically. But I've long been visiting galleries and looking at paintings and kind of absorbing them. So the relationship is, in a way, that art is part of experience. Part of experience, just like life and memories and reading are part of experience. And they flow into your brain through the eyes, through the ears, and they kind of ferment away there. And sometimes you see something and it clicks, and it clicks. You may not know why, or you may recognize it and think, oh, that is just like the Angela Repping painting that we saw yesterday, or that's something. And you take a photograph, you do a sketch, and it comes out that way. Or sometimes there is no connection at all. So there is a good deal of variety, but it's all the kind of melting pot of the brain and different kinds of experience which become assimilated with each other.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Frederick? Anyone? Oh, Miriam, are you waving your hand or no? No. Well,
there's one in the chat, Jamie.
Sorry. Oh, there's one in the chat. Thank you. Let me check.
Yeah. Ideas wait until they're realized. How do you manage all the ideas? Are they in the subconscious waiting to be found? Right. I don't really manage them. Just sometimes one will surface and maybe I'll forget about it again, or it'll surface again. And then I think now is the time to do that. And sometimes there is a wait because of all sorts of contingent circumstances, but sometimes it's just that I don't yet know how to do that image. The skill set, I haven't worked out how to pull that particular thing off. So sometimes an image will wait for years. I'm aware that I want to do it. The Monet's Garden at Giverny waited for a long time to be turned into a print because I wasn't sure how to go about doing it. And do the images lurk in the subconscious? They probably lurk in the distributed memory, which is all in different parts of the brain waiting to come together, and something will spark off a kind of group of memories or one particular memory, and then it can come to the surface and maybe I can think about doing something. Do keep sketchbooks, which I look back at. I keep photograph albums, which I look back at. And that's another kind of source of bringing things to life.
Thank you very much. That's a really interesting, Frederick. this week we will be having some more events, but I'd just like to thank Frederick for spending time putting that presentation together for us. Really interesting to see how your practice has developed over the years as well, and your different methods of using mezzotints and etching plates, and it was interesting to see that your early copper plates as well. So I'd like to, if everyone can give Frederick a round of applause, it's fantastic. Thank you very much, Frederick. I know everybody's on mute and you probably can't hear that, but thank you anyway. Everyone, we will be doing some more events over the next week. This week we have on Wednesday evening Siobhan McLaughlin, who will be taking part and talking about our practice. And we'll be having some more events next week. We'll be kind of doing a reminder email next week with some of those events. I'd like to thank everyone for coming this evening, and I hope we see you on Wednesday. Okay, thank you very much.
And thank you for having me, and thank you all for coming.